Okay, good. All right, just making sure because I
Yes.
can't.
Yeah, you were advancing. Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
Wait,
good.
just
Thank you. All
go
right.
again real quick. Like go forward one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good, man.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right.
I didn't have chat up, so I couldn't see everybody yelling at me. So I
That's
apologize.
that's all good, man. We're doing it in prod. We're all right.
Well, hey, I don't mind being like the first to mess that up, or maybe the second. But anyways, this is the title slide I was ranting about and raving about, and the title slide that I really enjoyed making. It's got Freddy Krueger in the background and all that fun stuff, kind of to resemble the movie poster. So if anybody's seen Nightmare on Elm Street or the sequels and stuff like that, super good from a horror movie perspective. If anybody's into that. So again, this one time on a pen test, this was a finding in a Pincastle report that I had come across. Again, it was the first time that I had come across this finding, this particular one. I'd been using Pincastle for a while and really enjoy it. And if you follow me on social media, if you've heard me talk, I rave about Pincastle all the time from a defensive standpoint. But I use it in my pen tests all the time to identify things like this that can be abused from an attack perspective. So in this engagement, like I said, I was able to modify this logon script, but it led me down a path to finding additional attack paths, additional abuses of logon scripts. And I was really intrigued in this. And eventually I found out there wasn't a lot of tooling around identifying these misconfigurations. And that is, again, kind of the context of this talk, the tool I made and released last year. And kind of this is a summary or dialogue of those attacks, those abuses, and more importantly, how to identify them and eliminate those in an environment. So quick background, who am I? I started in help desk. I was a help desk guy right out of college. Went the help desk to sysadmin route. I spent a lot of time, 10 years, administering Active Directory, Windows environments, doing network administration, troubleshooting, support, and all that. My current kind of passion now is internal pen testing and assume breach. So I very much so like breaking and entering legally and with permission into Active Directory environments, around Active Directory environments. I like researching and carrying out engagements related to Active Directory and the associated components. So that's what I spend a lot of my time on now, is kind of researching threat actor, TTPs, what's going on in the environments, in the community, and implementing those in security engagements. I like to call myself, or kind of like my ethos or my saying is spirit of a hacker, heart of a defender. And Jake is very nicely put, calls me red with blue stripes, which I take to heart. I'm very proud of that badge that he has given me. Because I very much consider myself an offensive minded person, but with kind of defensive interests, and always trying to do things to help defenders and people in IT, sysadmins, and stuff like that. I do a lot of content, as you may see if you follow me on social media. I like posting and doing that social media thing and content. I write some tools. I wrote Script Sentry, which is the subject of this talk. I helped Jake out in the crew a little bit with Locksmith. I have a podcast and I work at Secure IT 360 doing offensive security engagements. So that's a little bit about me, quick background. So the subject of this talk, the culmination of the research that I did, is 4 categories of misconfigurations related to logon scripts and 9 specific misconfigurations within those. So 9 total misconfigurations that I identified. So the first one being plain text credentials. This is just quite obviously just credentials in the logon scripts, right? That would be, when you're mapping a share, adding a printer, or whatever the case may be, just adding credentials in logon scripts. The next kind of category is for unsafe permissions, I call it. This is could be a wide variety of things. It could be insecure permissions with like the SYSVOL or net logon share, which could be bad. The shares that are getting mapped in those logon scripts could have misconfigured permissions. Of course, the scripts themselves could have misconfigured permissions, group policy configured logon scripts, and there's kind of a wide breadth of misconfigured permissions here that could happen. There's also non-existent shares. So this is like when there's a share being mapped in a logon script, but that share, that server doesn't exist. That's a really fun one from an abuse and attack perspective, because it kind of piggybacks on something that Sean talked about earlier with like responder and relaying, and others have mentioned as well. And that's a really fun one from an abuse and attack scenario. And then the last one is admins with logon scripts. This one is really dangerous, obviously, but more rare to find based on what I've seen. And this is essentially like, your domain admin account has the script path attribute set, or it's configuring group policy to run a logon script when admins log in, or service accounts. And then the extra dangerous is when admins have logon scripts that are mapped, or have logon scripts where there are non-existent shares mapped in those logon scripts. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So logon scripts, real quick. A logon script is just a script that's executed as the current user, right? So, Susie in accounting logs in, she's got a logon script mapped to her account. That logon script runs whenever she logs in, right? To a domain join system. Now, logon scripts, as many of you may know, can be used to map shares. You can add printers with them. You can run commands. I think everybody here listening maybe has some crazy example of what a logon script has been used before, or has seen, crazy things with logon scripts. It could be used to start programs, update Office templates, install software, audit logon times. There's a whole number of things that I've seen, and many of you have probably seen, be implemented in logon scripts, good, bad, or ugly, right? So logon scripts can be in a number of different formats. You can have batch files, right? Just batch file logon scripts, Visual Basic, CMD files, PowerShell even. I've seen that quite a bit. And Kix. Kix is a new one for me. I had never heard of the Kix scripting language, but it's apparently really live and well. It's being updated regularly. So you can actually use Kix in logon scripts, and that has its own language and its own syntax and all that stuff. And then the logon scripts are in a known location. There is the domain SYSVOL and netlogon shares. If you're on the domain controller itself, being C, Windows SYSVOL under domains, and then scripts. And of course, group policy, you can configure logon scripts there. And then in the script path attribute of the Active Directory object for a user, you can also specify the name of a logon script there. Now, you can also change that logon script location. I've never really come across any environments. I'm curious if anybody listening, if anybody has changed the netlogon share. I'd be curious to hear if there are additional abuse scenarios there because of changing that and kind of permissions that can be misconfigured there. So what's the worst that could happen, right? Well, plain text credentials, we could have credential theft, obviously. We could potentially get code execution with these unsafe permissions, which we're going to dig into a little bit. Imagine if there is a share that has misconfigured permissions that's installing a program or starting a program, right? That could be pretty dangerous. The non-existent shares and admin login scripts could be used for persistence, for lateral movement, and kind of all of these, depending on the scenario, are kind of an a la carte, choose your own adventure type of scenario that could be abused in a number of different ways. So quick shout out to Black Hills for their Backdoors and Breaches, which is an instant response card game. This has been in Backdoors and Breaches for a while, maybe even the first revision. And this is a little bit different from a mistake that somebody has made to configure the logon scripts. This is more from an attacker perspective, installing a malicious logon script, but kind of the same concepts apply. So this is a good blog post, good article that talks about logon scripts, how they can be used for nefarious deeds. So the first issue is plain text credentials. So plain text credentials essentially looks like this on the screen. So the top example there is a PowerShell script that's using convert to secure string commandlet. And it's putting the password right in the string variable. And so you can search for things like as plain text. You can search for that string variable. There's a couple different things you can search for that. But that's what some of the things you want to look for. In addition to that, you can look for the /user command. So when you do net use and then you specify explicit credentials, that's something you also want to look for in those login scripts to be able to identify where these plain text credentials are being used. So how can this be abused? This is quite obvious. This is kind of the most prevalent one that I see, that I've seen in the past year. And essentially credential theft, password reuse are kind of the two that come to mind. And that's because authenticated users by default can read those logon scripts, right? They need to be able to execute them, so they have to be able to read them. So this can be kind of dangerous if you're mapping shares for users that don't necessarily need access to it or shouldn't have access to it with those sensitive credentials. Unsafe permissions. So this is kind of a big bucket category, like I said. And this is encompasses a couple different things that we're going to walk through. So unsafe share permissions, file permissions, netlog, SYSVOL, those all have to do with the shares or the files themselves. Same with script permissions. So kind of the most dangerous in this specific category would be the unsafe netlogon SYSVOL permissions. So you can imagine if the SYSVOL share is misconfigured, you can do way more than just mess with the logon scripts, right? You can mess with group policy, and lots of interesting attack scenarios come to mind from that perspective. So this is a bucket category for those things. And in the first example on the left, you can see there's this run.vbs logon script. And inside of that, Visual Basic is calling another batch file or calling a batch file on a share. And that share, that script actually has misconfigured permissions such that this user one, this non-admin, non-IT user, is able to modify this run.bat batch file on this file share one. So obviously, kind of if you're following the chain here, we can modify a batch file that's being called by a logon script that's maybe being executed under a number of different users. So we can control that, and we can modify that to essentially whatever we want. We can put a reverse shell in there, have that execute. We could add ourselves to the local admins group. We could create a scheduled task, kind of you name it from an abuse standpoint. But essentially what you want to look for in this scenario is unsafe users and unsafe permissions. So you want to look at these logon scripts, look at the dependencies within the logon scripts. So in the case of this run.vbs, it's calling another batch file. So I've seen a couple nested logon, or I've seen a situation where the logon script calls a batch file, which calls a program, which calls another thing. And you kind of get into this nested situation where ultimately there's something, there's some permission that's misconfigured that affects all the way up the chain to be able to abuse it. So unsafe share permissions would be the share itself. So like in this example, file share one, many times that can be misconfigured, right? For or to allow any user to modify the share, which we see all the time. The file permissions would be, in this case, it would be the run.bat. That would be, the files, the programs that are being called or referenced or executed from those logon scripts. We talked about a little bit about the netlogon SYSVOL share as well. That would be the whole netlogon SYSVOL share as a whole itself. So not only could you modify the logon scripts, potentially abuse group policy and things like that. And then of course, I've seen the logon scripts themselves have misconfigured permissions. So netlogon was good, SYSVOL was good, those permissions were good, but for some reason, this logon script was able to be modified by domain users, for example. So we've seen that as well. And then of course, group policy is a beast of it in its own, but we've also seen situations where group policy has been misconfigured or the permissions on those logon scripts within the group policies have been misconfigured specifically. So for this one, and similar to many, permission-based attacks or permission-based vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, is kind of two components. There's unsafe users and unsafe permissions. So unsafe users would be things like the everyone group or domain users or authenticated users, right? Users that are non-admin, non-IT. This could even be the accounting group or the executive assistance group. These are non-administrative accounts that shouldn't really have access to modify or control these files. And then there's unsafe permissions. So the two that come to mind are full control and write or modify permissions. So if I have full control of that logon script, I can obviously do whatever I want. Write, modify, if I can change that logon script. Again, we're in a pretty precarious situation there. So that's unsafe permissions from an identification standpoint. So abuse, I talked a little bit about it. I got a little ahead of myself, but from an abuse standpoint, it kind of depends on what the vector is. So if there's a share that's being mapped and that share has misconfigured permissions, maybe that allows me to read sensitive data or see information that I'm not supposed to be able to see or access it. A good one that I like that I've seen before is an office template. So office templates that get loaded whenever a user is, creating a new document or they're sending out some letter or something, and that office template gets loaded, that could be used for code execution on those machines. I've seen where programs are started or installed from those logon scripts, and if you're able to modify that file that's deployed or that executable that's running, I could run my own executable and my own MSI and those kinds of things. So I could potentially, if in the case of an MSI, I could potentially get, code execution as trusted installer, which I think John Hammond did a video on just recently about trusted installer abuse, coincidentally. But there's a lot of attack vectors here that kind of depends on what the issue is, where the permission misconfiguration is, and kind of what you have access to from that standpoint. Good. Non-existent shares. So non-existent shares are quite simply just shares that don't exist, right? Pretty self-explanatory. But how you kind of identify this is you're looking for things like drive mappings. So where like it shows in the screenshot, where you're using net use and you're specifying a server name and a share name, where you are doing software installations. So if you look for, like MSI exec and it's trying to install something from a share, which is very common. Regedit, like you see in the screenshot as well, if you're importing a registry setting or a group of registry settings that are referencing a UNC path, that could also be dangerous. That share might also not exist. So these are UNC paths, right? With servers or shares that don't exist. So when you go to ping that server or you go to look it up in Active Directory, it doesn't exist. So kind of the things to look for are these UNC paths that are in logon scripts, and the case where these servers, where these shares don't exist. So there's no AD account, there's no DNS entry, and those are the things to look for when it comes to these non-existent shares. So from an abuse standpoint, this also can be abused in a number of different ways. The further we get down this chain, kind of notice the more a la carte or the more choose your own adventure, I like to say, you get with these issues. But this one is really interesting because this one you can use, and I've used in conjunction with the next issue to kind of do a wombo combo with these issues to create like a really, really bad scenario. So this non-existent shares abuse scenario would be, could be used for like relaying attacks or machine in the middle attacks, credential theft. So you could potentially steal, NTLM credentials, NTLM v2, things like that. It could be used to elevate privileges, right? And I'll show kind of a little bit more about this in the next use case here, or the next category. Could also be used for code execution, lateral movement, as many of these other things could be. But again, it all goes back to that server not existing. So there's no DNS entry, there's no AD computer object. And some of the prerequisites for abusing this would be that the DNS entry doesn't already exist because authenticated users wouldn't be able to modify it in most environments. But by default, authenticated users can create new DNS entries. So, I know Jake and the crew over there at Trimark, they do these assessments, and I'm actually curious to see or hear, how often they see an environment where DNS is restricted. It's one of the things that's kind of an opening as an attacker. If I can create a DNS entry and point to my attacker machine or my victim machine, I can kind of use that for many different Active Directory based attacks. So that is that's the abuse scenarios for non-existent shares. So admins with logon scripts, you want to look for, so admins and logon scripts, let me get ahead of myself. This is where admins have logon scripts set, right? So think about your domain admin accounts, your enterprise admin accounts, your service accounts even. Any account that has privileges you might not necessarily want a logon script tied to that. So you want to look for your tier 0 accounts. You want to look for your IT admin accounts, your service accounts, checking those accounts for a script path attribute, but also looking in group policy as well to make sure there's no like item level targeting or any group policies that would apply to those admin accounts from a logon script perspective. Most of the time you can do what you need to do in those scenarios with other means than logon scripts. So from an abuse standpoint, again, kind of a la carte, choose your own adventure, right? If an admin has a logon script set, those logon scripts get executed as in the context of that current user. So if we're able to modify the logon script, or if we're able to modify something that's kind of a dependency within a logon script, or is some sort of follow-on script that's being referenced, or a program, kind of have our way and kind of have our choice of attacks from that standpoint. Now, this is much more rare from my perspective and what I've seen in the last year or so. And obviously, you have to be able to modify the script or something within the script, kind of like the screenshot shows. If I can modify, this actually isn't a good example to show like all of the scenarios. But if I'm able to modify a program that's being called from one of these logon scripts that's mapped to an admin, or a share potentially, it opens up a lot of different attack vectors. And of course, you have to have a logon event in order to trigger this. So in the case of, say, a service account, let's say there's a logon script that's misconfigured and it's being run by a service account. That service account might not be logging in, so it might not trigger that logon event. So there will be some caveats there, some prerequisites from an abuse standpoint. So this is one of the fun ones. This is kind of getting into kind of the fun attack scenarios, I would say. The other ones are interesting and there are fun attack paths from that perspective. But this one is kind of interesting because of kind of how dynamic it could be. So this is admins with logon scripts that are mapped. Sorry, admins with logon scripts that map non-existent shares. So that's a mouthful. I always get it wrong when I say it. So it's admins with logon scripts mapping non-existent shares. So what that means is, number one, there's an admin with a logon script set. So you can see here, this IT admin has this test.bat script set in the script path attribute. So when this IT admin goes to log in, it's going to try and go to the net logon share, and it's going to try and execute this file called test.bat. You need that plus this non-existent shares thing. So this non-existent shares thing, again, is combining the previous issue, which is the server doesn't exist, so the share doesn't exist. And because of that, I can, because of the way these UNC paths work and the way DNS works, because of that, I can implement or install my own DNS entry, right? I can create my own DNS entry as an attacker. I can point that to my attack machine. And now I have kind of a built-in free relaying, credential abusing attack path here. So if I can modify that logon script that an admin is using, if I can create a DNS entry and that DNS entry and that machine account doesn't exist, then I have a pretty good chance of obtaining admin credentials, using that for relaying attacks, lateral movement persistence, all that jazz kind of comes to play here. And as you can see, I was able to exploit this pretty successfully. So you create a DNS entry, you point it to your attack machine, you fire off that logon script, and sure enough, you can get credentials, you can relay it. There's a lot of interesting attack scenarios here, especially when you think about attacks like resource-based constraint delegation, NTLM downgrade attacks, with responder. A lot of different unique attack paths here, just from simply, having an admin have a logon script, really, and those shares not existing. So it can be pretty dangerous. So with that, in 2023, after doing a bunch of research, after doing a bunch of engagements and seeing this time and time again, saw there was kind of a gap in the market, if you will. And I thought maybe I would write an open source tool and kind of release it and help other people identify this issue and call to light some of these issues that I've been seeing. So this is a defensive oriented tool. This is an identification tool. There's no abuses built into this, none publicly at least. I've reserved those all for my private stash or my private collection. But they're not hard, as you can see. They're not really super difficult to weaponize or abuse for the most part. So this is called Script Sentry, and essentially it's designed to find all of these dangerous and misconfigured logon script misconfigurations, misconfigured permissions that I've mentioned in this presentation previously. So it's really easy to use. You can IEX and run it. You can save the results to a text file, to a CSV file. It's pretty cool. Super easy to run. So again, it finds all of these issues that I just talked through. So it'll find plain text credentials. It will find these unsafe permissions, these various different unsafe permissions. It'll find these non-existent shares. It'll find admins that have logon scripts set, and it will present them to you. And it also will find whether there are admins with logon scripts that have misconfigured shares or non-existent shares, I should say. It'll even show you if a DNS entry exists or not. So you can see, well, is this exploitable? Potentially, maybe, possibly. So I've got a quick demo of just running through the tool. It's super quick and easy. Essentially, if so the previous version didn't have as much error handling as I would like. So when it didn't find any scripts, it have a bunch of red stuff yelling at you. But I did implement some better error handling for those who are just looking at it now or have seen it before. So when there are no logon scripts set, it will tell you like, hey, no logon scripts or no UNC pass found, no non-existent shares. It'll kind of tell you. So educate the user a bit. So when I click play, it's going to run through, and then I'll just I'll try to pause it to kind of talk through it. So you just invoke Script Sentry and you run it. And depending on the size of your environment, how many forests, how many domains, how many logon scripts, this will take 30 seconds, 10 seconds, a minute. Depends on how big the environment is. So it will find, like it shows, UNC folder permissions here. It says domain users has modify rights. So as you can see, when you run Script Sentry, it'll tell you the type of issue that it found. It'll tell you the folder or the file that's misconfigured. Tell you the users that are misconfigured on that, and then the rights, obviously the permissions that are misconfigured. So you can see it found that this file share one accounting share allows everyone full control. See, domain users is configured to be able to modify the net logon share, all sorts of bad stuff. Logon scripts misconfigured, GPO logon scripts. One of my favorites, again, is admins with logon scripts set. Find a whole bunch of different plain text credentials that are potentially loaded in those logon scripts. And then, of course, the non-existent shares. It'll show you the server name, the share name, the script that it's being called from, and if there's a DNS entry. So in this case, this is prime attack scenario for this non-existent shares attack scenario or abuse, if you will. And that's it. So like I said, you can also export this to a text file, to a CSV file for easier preserving and use. Cool. All right. So I'm speeding along. I tend to talk fast. I'm from New York. So in conclusion, from a defensive advice standpoint, all those things I previously said about how to identify those things all are still very true. And I recommend doing on a regular basis as a whole, just, on a regular basis, just right out of the gate. All those things I did implement in Script Sentry. So all those things I referenced and checks and all those identity-based detections there are all in Script Sentry. But, as time goes on, there'll probably be more different unique things. So definitely audit, review your logon scripts. Every time I put this in as a finding in a report, I always hear the same thing. And it's, oh, we forgot about it, or we didn't know it was out there, or we thought so-and-so cleaned it up, or we didn't realize it was that bad, or we didn't realize exactly what was out there. So just doing some hygiene, just doing some cleanup, out with the old, in with the new, right? Just going through cleaning up those scripts and those repos, those shares can go a long way. And, obviously run Script Sentry on a regular basis to help you with that. Don't hard code credentials. I think that's pretty self-explanatory to this group, but there is a thing of a legacy debt, and we find these all the time. And it's usually the case of we didn't know it was there. Many times the credential isn't even valid anymore. It's for an account that just doesn't exist anymore. We've seen that. But always, look at those scripts and know what's in them, know what they're going to do. Review them, review the files that are deployed, the programs that are being installed, all the shares that are being referenced, and check all of those. And then obviously you want to restrict or remove those logon scripts from admin accounts. That's pretty dangerous. You don't generally need admins to have logon scripts. And if you are going to use logon scripts, it's recommended to use group policy. It's a little bit better, a little bit easier, cleaner to use, a little bit safer. And as many sysadmins will lament to you, that item level targeting is very underappreciated and underutilized. So item level targeting is great to be able to specify which groups get which logon scripts or which printers or which shares. And that can be a really powerful way to kind of delineate who gets what logon scripts, shares, printers, etc. So I've got some resources, all the things that I used and included in the slides and in my research here. And I encourage you to go check out all these resources. Super good stuff. And with that, I want to give a thanks to Sean for his work with adsecurity.org. I know many of us have probably come up the ranks reading his blogs and reading his content and watching his stuff. So big thanks to Sean and everybody at Trimark, Jake, Danny, and everybody who's helped put this event on. Trimark 2024. Super appreciate you guys, and thanks for having me out to chat. I appreciate
this. Is so much fun because like I was back getting our next presenter ready, Crystal, and like we were just chatting about like headphones and DEF CON and all this shit, and all of a sudden I see a thank you slide. I was like, oh. I sound like I'm always on the lookout for the ending slide because I don't know what's going on. Dude, Spencer, you're awesome, bro. I'm not burping into the mic. Yes, at Tech Spence on Twitter. He's also on LinkedIn. You can find him. Dude, like you are one of the people whose names get mentioned like the most often in our work chat because like you're you and you put out so much cool stuff and we couldn't have been happier. Again, like Brandon and Jake talked about before, this was a blind CFP, which we feel is the most fair way to do this, like on merit of abstract alone. There were even a couple there was one abstract we actually had to go back and say like, oh, we want this, but like you gotta give us a little bit more, right? So imagine my pure joy when like they picked your talk, and I was like, absolutely, because if you denied Spencer, we'd have some explaining to do. But
no, I'm super appreciated, super humbled to be invited to speak. And yeah, I look up to all you guys and Sean and everybody and all the stuff you guys are doing. So I'm super grateful to be here and chatting and sharing what I know. So
yeah, dude, you're awesome. So if you could hang out in the Discord a little bit, if people have questions for you, they might want to gank some of your slides. Jake, did you want to say something? Why are you here? I mean, maybe turn your mic on if you're gonna
unmute myself first, because I swear I have done Zoom once before.
No, I don't think you have.
Least. I probably not. No. I just, Spencer has been actually was the first other person to write locksmith code other than me. So like, I know
the little tool that could.
The little tool that could, right? So,
yeah.
It's been great working with him. And yeah, what's up?
No, there's actually two questions in Zoom for Spencer. Spencer, first, how often do you recommend running your tool?
I don't think logon scripts change a whole ton, like a whole lot. If you're going through a lot of like maintenance or stuff, you might want to run it more frequently. But I mean, once a quarter, I mean, it's probably fine depending on how often you're modifying logon scripts. But if you're a pen tester or if you do security assessments, do it every assessment, run it every time, check those things. So that would be what I would say.
And I'm sorry if it's not Dane, but like Dane or Dane, I'm gonna guess Dane maybe. With the non-existent shares, are you saying that attackers can take over those resources and place CNC installers or other malicious items for users to click on?
Yeah. So imagine a scenario where you are mapping a share, right? Like net use G, non-existent share. If that share doesn't exist, if there's no AD computer account and there's no DNS entry, you can, as an attacker by default in Active Directory, create a DNS entry, point it to your victim machine, And then whenever that logon script is executed, it's going to try and hit that DNS entry, right? That UNC path. It's going to say, oh, I know this host. It's over here, right? It's my victim machine. It's my attack machine. And then, that authentication will go through there. If there's programs being run from there, it'll try and find that program in that path. So it opens up a lot of attack vectors, just basic, out of the box in Active Directory.
TriMark Vision is the next evolution in the identification of security issues across all your Active Directory environments. The TriMark Risk Score is based on real-world expertise of TriMark's industry-leading Active Directory and Microsoft Cloud security experts. Most importantly, TriMark Vision helps you to answer the questions facing your Active Directory security posture today, such as what risk do I have in my environment? What actionable steps can I take today, tomorrow, this week to best mitigate my risk of an attack on my Active Directory? What should I be most concerned about within my Active Directory forest where it concerns potential attack vectors? What is the current security posture of all my AD forests? TriMark Vision, visibility at the speed of operations.